everyone. I'm Nicole, and this is the Wild for Change podcast. Today, we're speaking with Teresa Becher and Mandy Migura from the Alaska Wildlife Alliance about the special population of endangered beluga whales who live in the Cook Inlet in the central Gulf of Alaska. Teresa is the beluga whale monitoring coordinator who coordinates monitoring sessions of a whole team of volunteer community scientists and is the go-to expert on the beluga whales' behaviors in the Kenai and Castleoff rivers. Mandy is the Deputy Director and Marine Program Officer for AWA. One of her responsibilities is to coordinate a group of nonprofits who advocate for the recovery of the Cook Inlet beluga whales, a position she is uniquely suited for, given her prior 11-year experience as the Cook Inlet beluga whale recovery coordinator when she worked for the National Marine Services, now called NOAA Fisheries, and is known as the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Thank you, Teresa and Mandy, for coming here today on the Wild for Change podcast and speaking to us about this very special group of beluga whales.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
having
you,
us.
Nicole.
Yes, I'm very eager to learn about this special population of whales in Alaska. And I wanted to start off with if you could give listeners some more background about your roles and how you support the beluga whales in the Cook Inlet.
Thank you for the introduction, Nicole. As you mentioned, my name is Mandy Migura, and I came to Alaska Wildlife Alliance, or AWA, after working with NOAA Fisheries, which is the federal government agency responsible for management of Cook Inlet belugas. And I worked with them for 11 years. During that time, I was the Cook Inlet Beluga Whale Recovery Coordinator. And for a couple of years, I was also the Marine Mammal Stranding Response Coordinator for the Alaska region, so for this whole state.
Oh.
That means I had my finger in all things pertaining to the population of the beluga whales residing in Cook Inlet, from research to stranding responses to reviewing activities by others to ensure they didn't jeopardize the continued existence of these whales. So it's kind of like the permitting side of the house. At AWA, which is a nonprofit organization, I work on the other side of the table. And not only do I provide AWA's voice during public comment periods offered by the government, so that's where we get to kind of say, here's our concerns about belugas from this project, but I also coordinate and advise a group of nonprofits, all interested in doing what they can to improve the situation for these endangered whales. So that's kind of my nutshell of what I do for belugas.
That's a big nutshell.
It's a huge nutshell. And so my name is Teresa Becher, and I retired after 25 years working in law enforcement in California for the California Highway Patrol, and moved up here to Alaska and went back to school as a natural sciences major with a pre-veterinary focus, thinking that I would go back to school and perhaps maybe try to go to vet school. In that role, I was involved in several different projects and situations. I interned, for example, with Alaska Wildlife Alliance and helped them with a lot of their training sessions for people, educational opportunities, and then with the text alert system. But then I also volunteered with the Alaska Beluga Monitoring Partnership, now program. And then I have been involved in several research projects that pertain to belugas, including mainly just helping with things like acoustical monitoring on the Kenai River. And then, and currently still we do an eDNA project where we do water sampling on the Kenai River once a month through Kenai Peninsula College. And what we're looking for is prey is in the river that the belugas might be coming into the river for. And then I also volunteer with the Stranding Network through the Alaska Sea Life Center, and have been involved in responding to all types of marine life, and have had the honor and privilege of working with them to do things like necropsies of beluga whales and learning more about their anatomy and how they strand, what's happening with them when they strand. My major role, though, is as the Kenai coordinator for the Alaska Beluga Monitoring Partnership, and we'll talk a little bit more about that program. Excuse me. See, I'm the one making that mistake. um, but mainly, I work main coordinator of the program, and my focus is on the Kenai and Kasilof rivers. I'm one of the lead volunteers, and so I do a lot of training with them. I double check that sessions are, and I fill them myself as necessary if I possibly can. I meet with volunteers and on an ongoing basis to share and then to answer any questions they might have. I also meet with boaters that are down there at the Kenai City docks, trying to increase public awareness that belugas are in the river at certain times. Boats are a major threat to them in terms of propeller hits, that sort of thing. And so I spend and then I do a lot of presentations on belugas, educating people in the local area about what's going on with their Cook Inlet belugas and the fact that they do come into the rivers.
There's a couple of things I want to highlight on Teresa's bio is that she also manages AWA's text alert system, which I think she'll talk about a little bit later. But she's the one who's sending out the text alerts for when we learn about belugas in the Kenai or Kasilof rivers. But also, she did not mention that because of her amazing work with Cook Inlet belugas, she's actually won NOAA's Spotlight Award this year for being such an amazing contributor to beluga recovery and information. So we are so honored that Teresa is going to be recognized for that, or has been recognized, and won that really prestigious award. So big shoes there as well, Teresa.
Thank you, Teresa, for all your hard work. Thank you both. And that's really amazing to have that kind of recognition.
Yes, it is. So I wanted to make sure folks know she is really amazing.
Yeah.
So Cook Inlet, it is kind of a little offshoot of the Gulf of Alaska, and it comes up into South Central Alaska. And kind of in my mind, and this might be backwards on the screen, but I kind of see it coming up from south to north, and it kind of makes this little split at the top. And then Anchorage is kind of nestled in between these two arms. So there is Knik Arm that kind of goes up a little bit further north, and then we've got Turnagain Arm, which is a little more east. And then the area that Teresa's monitoring is more mid-inlet. And so the Kenai River and the Kasilof River are kind of in the middle inlet on the east coast, if you will, as you're looking at the east side of the inlet.
Okay.
And so that is one of the more centralized human hubs, population hubs. So Anchorage is the largest one in the largest city in the whole state. And so it's nestled up at the northern side portion of Cook Inlet. And then kind of the midway is where Kenai and Kasilof rivers are. Okay. And so one of the great things about that monitoring project that Teresa's leading is we're learning that belugas actually do go miles and miles up those rivers. At times we weren't quite sure that they were in the rivers. So very valuable.
Oh, okay. Okay, so so the more you're monitoring them, the more research you're gathering and understanding more and more of their habits and what they're doing. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for that. Can you provide us with a background of what is happening to the whales and when their population began to decline?
Yeah, so to start with, I think everybody knows that when we're talking about beluga whales, we're talking about relatively small white whales and that have no dorsal fin. So we're not talking about a large whale like a humpback whale. This is much smaller in scale, kind of maybe like a very, very large dolphin size. Something folks may not know, though, is that belugas are actually born a very dark brown or gray, and they lighten up and eventually turn white as they age. So just a little fun fact, they're not all white. Okay. So just a little bit about belugas. They are an Arctic species, which means that in the US, they only reside in the wild in Alaska. You will find belugas in aquariums in other places in the US, but in the wild, they're only in Alaska. And we have 5 recognized stocks of belugas up here in Alaska, with the belugas residing in Cook Inlet being geographically and genetically distinct from all the other beluga whales. And so pretty much that means they don't intermix with any other belugas. So if we lose the beluga whales in Cook Inlet, we've lost them. No other belugas will be coming into Cook Inlet to repopulate that. So that's something very unique about them. Other stocks, they do migrate. Cook Inlet beluga whales are in Cook Inlet year round or up into some of the little rivers. Your question about, when the population began to decline, it's kind of hard to know exactly when that decline began, because surveys were not conducted regularly until the early 1990s. So there are historical anecdotal reports that there were so many belugas in a bay or an area that you could walk across their backs to get to the other side.
Wow.
So that tells you there was a lot, and it's not just one of those types of reports. However, the first survey that was actually conducted, the first scientific survey that was conducted, was done in 1979 by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And they only surveyed part of where we know belugas are found in large numbers. So there was a correction factor added and to account for missed whales. And the estimate that came out from that survey was that there was 1,297 belugas. A very precise number for an estimate.
Yeah.
So that number, which has been rounded to 1,300, is what is considered the carrying capacity of Cook Inlet for a healthy beluga whale population. So in the early 1990s, NOAA Fisheries began surveying for Cook and the beluga whales annually. And they initially estimated about 650 whales. So from 79 to 93, we can see that there was a disparity, there was a decline. NOAA surveyed every year in the 90s, and they noticed that in the mid-90s, the population dropped by about 50%. So we know there was a very sudden, very intense reduction in the population during that 4 to 5 year window.
Wow.
You have to speculate that it was continued decline years before that, though. And so the most recent estimate that we have is that there's around 300 belugas left. The NOAA's last survey was in 2022, the last estimate. They were surveying every other year, so on the even years, since the mid 2014, 2012, 2014, they switched to an every other year schedule. Unfortunately, COVID canceled a survey, so we only have 2018 and then 2022. So what we're kind of seeing is the population is hovering around the 300 mark. Sometimes it's above, sometimes it's below. But that's kind of the best ballpark, is we have somewhere around 300 belugas left in Cook Inlet. From the 79 estimate, we had 1,300.
Right.
So we have essentially lost 1,000.
It's a significant drop off.
It is a significant drop off. And because of that, they are actually listed under the Endangered Species Act as an endangered species.
Okay. Because of this drop off, it's unfortunate that you've got just this very small population left. What are the major threats to their existence?
So NOAA Fisheries has formally identified and ranked 10 threats to this population of beluga whales. And they've ranked them as high, medium, low. And so I will present them in that order. So the high threats are, and this one's kind of a catch-all, but it's the cumulative effects of multiple stressors. And a way to think about that, because that's a lot of words, basically it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. So you can, the camel the old analogy has all these little straws added on, and it's fine. And each one by itself is not the thing that's going to do the camel in, but it's the cumulative nature of all these stressors being added on to belugas. That is a high threat to the population. Other kind of more individualized things that they've recognized as a high threat are catastrophic events. So if there was another Exxon Valdez oil spill that occurred in Cook Inlet, that could be devastating to this population of belugas. And then the agency has also identified noise as a high threat to Cook Inlet belugas. The medium ranked threats include a reduction in prey. So kind of, do they have enough food to eat to keep them healthy? Do they have enough food to let the population grow? We know that up here in Alaska, we've had a lot of fishery disasters designated. Our fish runs are getting smaller. The fish are getting smaller themselves. The timings are changing. So is there enough food for belugas? We also know that disease is an issue that is listed as a medium threat. Habitat loss and degradation is considered a medium threat, as is unauthorized take. And take is a legal term that the government uses. Another way to think about it is unauthorized harassment or poaching, things like that, things that people don't have permission to do to the whales that may affect them negatively. And then the agency has identified 3 threats that they considered low concern, and that is pollution, predation, and subsistence hunting. And it's interesting, subsistence hunting is in there because as a threat, and I think they included it because it was a historical threat. Subsistence hunting has not occurred since 2005. It's legally not allowed. So the fact that that's listed as a threat really shouldn't be, in my opinion, because it's not legally allowed anymore.
Right.
And hasn't been for some time. And so, I will say NOAA Fisheries does focus a lot of effort on the threat of noise. There are a lot of studies that they're doing, a lot of listening, a lot of watching, and counting the belugas. And so I'm kind of working with a group of nonprofits, and we've decided to really focus our efforts on some of the less threats that get less attention, but that actually may have a greater impact if we can address on Cook Inlet belugas. And so we're really trying to look at the prey issue and the pollution issue.
Right.
So
Even
we're
though
having
those were moderate threats, correct? They weren't high, but they
correct.
are affecting them.
Yes. So the reduction in prey was a medium threat, but the agency said pollution was a low threat. So they are not doing anything regarding pollution. They don't even identify any recovery actions in their recovery plan regarding pollution. However, if an individual whale is not healthy enough to reproduce, and that could be because they're contaminated, we do know that belugas do carry contaminants in them. We do know there are different diseases. And if they don't have enough food to eat, this population's potential for recovery is very limited.
Right.
So they need to be healthy enough, and the cleanliness of the water that they're living in, and also the health of their food plays a factor. So the group of nonprofits I'm working with, we're really looking at, is there enough food? If not, what can we do? And then what can we do about pollution? And what's really going to be impactful for belugas? Is it bad? We know belugas are contaminated with certain different chemicals and heavy metals, things like that.
Right.
But we just don't have a grasp on how bad yet.
Okay. So that's what you're looking into in this now moment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can understand how that could be a very massive threat, like you said, if they're unable to breed because of all of these toxins that they're carrying around. Could be very detrimental to their future.
It definitely could be, yeah. There are some reports that have come out that Teresa talked about participating in necropsies. I had the opportunity back in my former life with NOAA Fisheries to also help out on some necropsies, and they were seeing some interesting things in some of them, and there were some cases of some belugas that were very, very young, or that were trying to be sensitive in my language, miscarried, that had congenital defects. And so that mom wasn't healthy enough to have a healthy baby.
Right.
And so why is mom not healthy enough? Why are these babies not being able to be carried to term, or being born but not surviving? what is going on. And so that's why this group of nonprofits decided to look at pollution and prey, of what can we really do to affect the health of individuals and the population.
Now, because NOAA Fisheries has deemed that pollution is like a
Low
not
threat.
lower threat, is there, with your work with other groups, your advocacy, could you change that to it being a higher threat with any research
So,
that you come across?
so these threats were identified in NOAA Fisheries recovery plan for coconut beluga whales, and those can be revised.
Mhm.
It is something NOAA Fisheries will have to revise, but what we can do is try to gather information and present it to them, and we can urge them certainly to revise it, to update it, and to come up with a plan to try to address, include activities to address the threat of pollution to coconut belugas.
Right.
So
Yes.
we are working on trying to do that, to try to get the information, to try to understand the situation so that various nonprofit groups, their supporters and members and others can apply some pressure to the government and saying, this is needed, this is a concern, we need to look at this, take action.
Yeah, I've done a lot of research on those threats, and one of the interesting things is that information was put into the recovery plan in 2016 or 20 from 2008 to 2016 when they first did the recovery plan. So it doesn't include all the threats, in my opinion. For example, global warming is not even mentioned, and
Right.
that plays a lot into pollution and the types of bacteria that can thrive in warmer water, that maybe they aren't used to, that are being introduced up here as our waters get warmer. Um,
Right.
and then on the prey issue, Alaska is not unique. We don't count every fish that's out there. And some of the fish that our belugas really need are hooligan or Euchelon. They aren't counted at all. And so we don't even have a good grip in terms of certain types of prey on how many fish there are. Um,
Oh,
so yeah, when Mandy's talking about prey and pollution, there's a lot of factors that play into paying a lot of attention to it. I have to do a shout out to Mandy because she did a whole thing on a whole mapping system on the different areas that, for example, pollution sources are running into Cook Inlet.
well, thank you for doing that, Mandy, because that was very helpful. It's very helpful for other groups to understand what the exact problem is and how much everything is contributing to the welfare of these whales.
Yeah, and I do think that there is a lot of validity, that it is more this straw that broke the camel's back scenario. There is not just one thing that we can point out and say that if we fix that, we're saving belugas. They're pretty much going through a gauntlet daily of all these different things that are coming
Right.
at them that they're having to deal with. Especially with Anchorage being the largest city in Alaska, we have coastal development going on. We have all kinds of noise introducing activities. We have a lot of boaters in the water. We have the largest port in the state. We have wastewater treatment facilities, some that are only primary, dumping into their habitat. We have the prey issue. We have
So
the
much.
changes in the water quality, which also we have potential for new viral agents to come up as the waters are warming. And so
Right.
that could be, if there's a new pathogen that they don't have resistance against, that could potentially wipe them out. There's only 300-ish left. So if there's something that's highly communicable, you know, so I do think, if we can get the individual whales healthy enough that they can withstand some of these things, then we
Right.
have a chance. We also, one thing I did not mention is what we know about the coconut beluga whales versus other beluga whales. is that their age at first reproduction appears to be delayed. So they're older before they're having their first baby.
Oh, wow.
And also the interval between babies is longer. So their reproduction rates are slower than other healthier populations.
Right.
So what can we do to bolster their health? So that's why the groups we're working with, the partnerships we have, we're really trying to figure out that aspect. And so what can we do to help give them more food? And what can we do to help them be healthier in general? And if we're polluting where they live, that's going to have a health effect.
Oh,
So
for sure. Is there anything in the works about restricting boaters in the inlet, just to reduce that type of pollution being, it's coming at them every day. There's just so much stress on them. I was just wondering, besides the noise, just the pollution from the boat itself.
I don't think so, to my knowledge.
Mm,
Um, right now, AWA, we're in the try to figure out the situation mode. How bad is it?
okay.
Um, One of the things that we with our partners just recently held was a Cook Inlet Water Quality Summit, because we were trying to figure out what steps can we take, and we realized we don't even know where the information is. It's hard to find it.
Mm.
AWA had submitted a public records request to the state of Alaska's Department of Environmental Conservation, and we asked for copies of all the permits for projects that had mixing zones, authorized mixing zones in Cook Inlet and in some of those tributaries. And what we learned is they don't really have a system to be able to find that information for us.
What's a
Um,
mixing zone?
that is an excellent question. Thank you for asking that. In my head, I was explaining it. um, a mixing zone is an area in a body of water where water quality standards are allowed to be exceeded.
Oh,
And so think about a project that, and this is very simplistic terms, something's happening and there's a pipe going out into the ocean and you see something coming out of the end of the pipe.
right.
There is a zone, kind of an area, usually a circle, but it could be a square, which is arbitrary in a water of body, in my opinion,
Exactly.
that within that zone, they are allowed to exceed the standards that are developed by the Clean Water Act or the state's water quality authority. And so part of the problem is there's this thinking of the solution to pollution is dilution.
Mm,
And so sometimes what has been seen is that instead of trying to reduce the amount of contaminants at the end of the pipe, what instead happens is the mixing zone is just expanded, because where they measure is at the end of the mixing zone to make sure that the water quality is meeting the standards.
wow.
So AWA, we queried the state asking for all the permits for mixing zones that were authorized, legally authorized to have a mixing zone. And what we found is they didn't have a system readily available to provide us with that. Instead, they had transitioned to a new online system. And fortunately, one of our partners had an intern, and she went through 11,000 records trying to figure out which ones
Oh,
had a
wow.
mixing zone. And then now we need to filter that down, and we will go back to the state asking them for those specific ones, copies of those specific permits. And then we are going to have to go to, according to what we've been told, we're going to have to then go to the Environmental Protection Agency and ask them for the discharge monitoring reports, because we want to know what is being dumped and what volumes, and how big is the mixing zone, because a mixing zone is variable. Not all projects are required to have the same one. And so kind of what we found initially is that there's oil and gas projects that have mixing zones. There's
Mm,
wastewater treatment facilities that have mixing zones. There are seafood processing plants that have mixing zones. And so this is just kind of our preliminary look. So we were realizing we're having a hard time just finding some of the information. So like what is being authorized was one kind of question. So we're working through that process, but also we want to know who is doing what in terms of research. Um, and that also is very disparate and hard to find. And so this group we're working with, our partners, we realize we can't really effectively come up with a strategy of where to put our efforts to reduce pollution until we know really what the situation is. So that is what led us to come up with the idea of having a Cook Inlet Water Quality Summit. And so it was originally started because of the belugas in Cook Inlet, but it grew into this much bigger event. And it was a 2-day event. And we had presentations from variety of sectors, government, private, nonprofit, all kind of sharing the work they're doing. We had status updates on some of the fish and wildlife in Cook Inlet. We had some projects that were either information about projects that may be affecting water quality poorly or positively. So it was nice to see there are some projects out there that are actively taking place to reduce pollution. Two examples just come right to the top of my head. One is at the Anchorage Airport, where there is a private group that is working on recapturing and reusing de-icing fluid. So it's not just washed off into Cook Inlet.
Oh,
And then
wow.
another one in Homer, the city of Homer, which is in the lower portion of Cook Inlet. They have developed this new green infrastructure and landscaping. And so it's cleaning kind of their like stormwater runoff before it goes back into the inlet. And they're using green solutions. So there
Wow,
are
that's
some really
amazing.
exciting projects going on. And then we also, of course, learned about folks just doing research, studying the temperature or the particular contaminants in particular areas. So it was a lot of information. And I am working on getting all of the different PowerPoint presentations together and putting them in the program book and getting that up online and sharing that. So all those presentations will be available to the public. And one of the presentations, I gave a presentation about Cook Inlet belugas and what is known. And I pulled a lot of information out of the beluga recovery plan and also did a quick literature review of things that have been published since the recovery plan about relating to Cook Inlet beluga whales and potential health pollution relating. So there will be some beluga information in there that can be shared. And once that's up, I can send you a link if you want.
Yes, that would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. That is a lot of consolidating. That is a lot of gathering of information from so
Yeah,
many different places. That's a lot of work. Thank you for doing all of that. And
yeah.
it's a shame that, nothing is formally structured where you can just gather this information. And in my mind, I'm thinking, how wonderful would it be if all water, all bodies of water were like marine protected areas where you didn't really have to worry about this thing where um, industries could do something with the pollution that they have and not dump it into large bodies of water that are affecting marine animals, the water quality itself, because it in turn affects us. I mean, it's really it's really a shame that all of this is happening. And like you said, the whales have all these threats happening to them 24 hours a day, and
Mhm.
you're doing the best you can to support their and continued survival. And thank you for bringing up the water summit, because I was going to ask about that. And my next question is that for the management of Cook Inlet, there's so many decision makers, there's local government, tribal councils, and everybody has different outlooks, correct? So
Mhm.
how do you make your voice heard? How does AWA work to be there for the whales and be that voice for them amongst these decision makers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do just want to caveat the Cook Inlet Water Quality Summit. While it started out being beluga centric, we actually had 8 different organizations that were on the planning committee. So it was really great collaboration on that. And most of them were not beluga centric, so there was so many different,
Wow.
great. And we also, it was great because we were able to have this panel discussion, and it kind of gets to this question. We had 9 different panelists, and they spanned local government, assembly level, city level, tribal government representatives, federal government representatives. And so we really kind of worked to bring them together to try to ask questions, because unfortunately, a lot of the management agencies have such defined sidewalls, and like they have to work within these boundaries, and they really don't get, and a lot of times, the ability to take a big picture approach. They're very stovepiped is a phrase I've heard a lot. And so one of the things that AWA can do is we don't have those boundaries. So we can connect the pieces. And so what we're really working on is getting information and getting it out to those agencies or those different organizations or entities, and trying to help connect the pieces. So, one of the things we did was the Cook Inlet Water Quality Summit with partners. We also worked with some of our partners, and we came up with a cumulative threats map that was presented at last year's Alaska Marine Science Symposium. And a lot of folks can't understand, it's confusing. What does cumulative threats mean?
Right.
So we just mapped them. We took some of kind of the low-hanging fruit, the easily mappable things, and we put them on a map. And we overlaid them with belugas critical habitat, with where belugas have been sighted based on satellite tag data, so where we know exactly belugas are. And we just said, here is the shipping traffic lanes, and we pulled data from that. Here are some of the mixing zones, the ones that we were actually able to find really readily. Here's the oil and gas infrastructure. Here are the zones that NOAA Fisheries has allowed belugas to be harassed.
Oh,
And so there's this map, and when you see it, it's just kind of like, where the heck are belugas supposed to go?
they have nowhere to go,
It's
right? I
almost the
mean,
entire inlet, and that's just from a few of those threats.
yeah,
Um,
that's not even all of
no,
the threats that were laid
exactly.
out.
Exactly. That was just like I said, the easily mappable ones that we were able to get data pretty quickly on. And so that is very compelling. And one of our partners is working with various legislatures to elevate the plight of Cook and the belugas at the national level,
Oh,
because right now
great.
it's very state local. So that has been helpful of trying to educate. As Teresa mentioned earlier, we are working on the prey issue as well, so it's not just pollution. And so AWA has submitted a proposal to the Board of Fish to try to reduce the amount of harvest of eulachon, also known as hooligan or candlefish. It's a very important, very fatty fish that belugas rely on early in the season. So they have this really lean winter, they lose a lot of weight. And in the spring, this is one of the first things that they eat. And so that helps them essentially survive and build their resources. And
Okay.
so we've put forth a proposal asking for a reduction in the amount of commercial harvest allowed of that particular fish in an area that's very important to Cook Inlet belugas. We're also exploring research opportunities with some scientists. So we have a fisheries biologist on board,
Oh,
and
great.
who's helping kind of do an update on the status of prey that are important to Cook Inlet belugas. The last kind of big picture update was done in the recovery plan back in 2016. So he presented his findings also at this earlier this year at the Alaska Marine Science Symposium. And then we're also working with another researcher trying to do a assessment of how much eulachon are actually in some important areas for belugas. So, and then, like I mentioned earlier, we do provide official public comments to the agencies on their actions. So kind of we have our partnerships, we have our research, we have our educational, our information um, uh, collection and sharing efforts of really just trying to get the word out. As a nonprofit, we're not the decision makers, but we are trying to get as much information to the decision makers at all levels to help them do their job better.
Well, you are definitely doing that.
We're trying, we're
Definitely,
trying.
yes. You're doing a tremendous job for these whales, and I thank you for that, for all of your hard work. I did before I ask about the beluga monitoring program, I wanted to just mention, and if you could just share a little bit more about sound, because the beluga whales are considered like the canaries of the sea. And
Mhm.
so they rely on that sound to find food, to call to their calves. And you mentioned the shipping lanes, like in the water, there's shipping lanes for these ships to come through. And so all of that sound back and forth has to have some kind of devastating effects on this population. Like how does it affect them? And do you notice like a detriment because of that to like their behaviors?
So I love when people kind of refer to them as canaries of the sea, because that name really came because of the really extensive vocal repertoire that they can make. But given their current situation and everything that they're facing, I can't help but kind of relate them to canaries of the coal mine. They're an
Oh,
indicator of kind of that the health of Cook Inlet. And
right.
if our top predator is not doing well, we know at different levels, a lot of things aren't doing well. But that aside, noise is an issue, and the federal government has recognized it is one of the highest concerns to Cook and the belugas. And something to know about Cook Inlet is that the waters are very turbid. So they're very murky. It's almost like chocolate milk in some places.
Wow.
Thus, vision is limited. That makes it harder for researchers. In some places, you see these beautiful images, aerial shots where you can see belugas underwater, and we're all so jealous of those because what we can see is pretty much nothing under the water. And most of Cook Inlet, we only get to see when the animal breaks the water. So we see a little bit of their back and then they're gone. If we're lucky, sometimes they'll spy hop or put a tail up. But those beautiful, easy shots, we don't get those usually. But that not only makes research more challenging for us, it means that the visual ability of belugas in Cook Inlet is also limited, especially in Upper Cook Inlet, where there's a lot of sediment coming into the system through glacial melt and runoff.
Mm,
And so they very much are relying on their hearing and echolocation abilities. And so if human caused sound is so loud that it drowns out their natural abilities to hear, then it's like they're swimming blind. And so this can have impairments to their ability to communicate with each other. So if a mom and a baby can't communicate, they might get separated,
mm,
and that could be very detrimental for the baby. It could impair their ability to find and catch prey. And this means that if they are having to spend more energy to eat, that's less energy available for their bodies to be healthy, less energy for their bodies to be able to reproduce or nurse their offspring. It may also affect their ability to avoid predators. So if they can't hear that killer whales are coming, or they can't hear their communication from another beluga kind of potentially alerting,
right.
then they're more susceptible to predation. Um, and then it also means potentially if they can't hear, they lose their ability to avoid vessels. And so we
Right.
have seen belugas with scars from vessel strikes. So we know that they are getting hit. Um, on the upside, we are seeing some that appear to have old scars. So not all of them are dying from that. And we are able to use those scarring patterns to identify individuals. But we don't advocate people going out and hitting belugas. And so I think Teresa will kind of talk about, some informational campaigns that we've partnered with to educate folks on boat strikes are real. So if they're pretty reliant on their hearing, it is a primary sense for them. And if our activities are essentially causing them to be deaf to their environment, it could be very detrimental to this population.
Right, right. Thank you for sharing that information because I was wanting to learn more about that. And just, it's unfortunate that they have these scars, that they are getting hit, but fortunately that some of them are surviving despite being struck.
Mhm.
Um, hopefully in the future things will change and they'll be a little bit more, um, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but just more aware that
Oh,
these animals are there, these mammals are there,
mhm.
and that that is their home. And if
Yes.
something can be done to reduce the noise pollution and the strikes, would be so beneficial for their future.
Yeah. And one thing to kind of for folks to consider is that because these belugas don't leave Cook Inlet, they can't get away from this.
Right,
So there are the safe spaces, the quiet or the refugia spaces in Cook Inlet are becoming less and less. And belugas need to go where there's food. It's also where the humans love to go because we love to fish as well. So there is also
right,
kind of some of that competition. And so belugas can't really get away. They're just like you said, it's their home. That's where they are in Cook Inlet. And unfortunately, the areas they prefer a lot of times are the same as the areas that we prefer. And so they can't just go to a less favorable area um, because
right.
they're not have enough food, or there might be other threats that we're not aware of that keep them out of that area. For instance, there are more killer whales in lower portion of Cook Inlet than in the upper portion of Cook Inlet, but there's more humans in the upper portion of Cook Inlet.
Yeah,
So
so
they have
where
this
where can
trade-off.
they go? Right.
Yeah,
There isn't really a refuge for them.
yeah, not much.
Right. Teresa, can you tell us more about the Alaska Beluga Monitoring Program and who is involved in the program?
Yes, thank you. So the Alaska Beluga Monitoring Program was established in 2019. The first season was in the fall, and it's a NOAA-based program. It's citizen science-based, and what that means is most of the volunteers are just all from the local communities, but specifically trained on how to monitor belugas and specifically trained on how to report the information back to NOAA. It's designed to be a collaboration between organizations, communities to collect and store the shore-based information about the belugas, but it's also designed to be something to bring public awareness to the plight of the belugas in each of these communities. The There's five basic, belugas are all over Cook Inlet. There's five, three, four, five, six basic places that they're monitored through the program, though. Ship Creek is one, and that's up in Anchorage itself. There are three spots in Turnagain Arm that are monitored, and then there's the Kenai and the Kasilof River, which are again further south along the eastern shore of the inlet. The groups that are involved are, of course, NOAA, Alaska Wildlife Alliance, and Kenai Peninsula College are the host organizations for the Kenai and the Kasilof rivers. Beluga Whale Alliance hosts two of the spots on Turnagain Arm. Alaska Wildlife Conservation Center hosts a platform at their facility for monitoring as well. And then Defenders of Wildlife, I think, is the host mainly for Ship Creek. This partnership it's perfect. You have these host organizations that are helping to publicize the effort along with NOAA. Staff from Alaska Wildlife and KPC are out there along with all the different volunteers, and then we provide a lot of the backup training and for the bigger projects like Belugas Count, which is another NOAA-based function every year. We are in there providing essentially the bodies to do the work to make sure that these events go off correctly. We also collaborate as an organization we try to collaborate with almost anybody who is working on beluga projects. One of our main collaborators is Cook Inlet Photo ID. And as you know, if you only have 300 whales, you can probably identify every one of them. And as
Yeah.
Mandy says, just to paint the picture, how they recognize them from just the dorsal fin is scar marks. And those scar marks can come from boat strikes. They can also come from nets. They can come from other types of interactions. But scar marks are the way that they can recognize most of the whales in Cook Inlet. But Cook Inlet Photo ID is another group that works closely with us. Let's see what else about AKBNP. Community science, why it's an integral part of this monitoring program. Mandy, I think, mentioned this earlier. They didn't even know how far up the Kenai River belugas went until a gal named Kim Ovitz came in and did a project in 2018 monitoring the belugas, and she got a lot of oral histories from the native population and from people who have just resided in Kenai and Kasilof for a long time. And they were able to give her information about just how far up the belugas went, what their population sizes were. So the locals knew. The locals had the information that the scientists did not have.
Wow.
And the locals were able to help her put together what her project was going to look like, where she was going to monitor, what times the belugas came into the river and what times they left. And I think the fact that it's a citizen scientist-based program speaks to the fact not just that we're trying to get citizens involved in helping to do a research project, but citizens were the basis for what we knew about belugas in these areas to begin with. Very important.
Yes. Wow. So integral.
Yes. Yeah.
Those spots that you mentioned about where you go to monitor them, I'm assuming that those spots are where they're mostly congregating, where they have a tendency to move towards.
Yes, or where they pass by, or
Okay.
where we think they're going to pass by to get to other places. In Turnagain Arm, for example, 20 Mile River is mostly where they're headed. They're going up Turnagain Arm and they're sort of fishing along the way. But one of the main monitoring sites is a pullout, and it just has better access to be able to see them go by right at that.
Okay.
Same thing on the Kenai River. When they come into the Kenai River, they're where we monitor from is just close to the mouth. And so we can see them coming and going from there. Where they're headed is farther upriver generally.
Okay.
And
how-
I'll just add in, there are other places in Cook Inlet that are extraordinarily important for Cook Inlet belugas, but they're not easily accessible via the road system. So some of these locations were also selected because it was easy enough for us to get there on a regular basis.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's really no monitoring sites on the west side of Cook Inlet. So all of these are pretty much accessible by humans as well.
Okay. And how often do you monitor?
We monitor, thank you. We monitor pretty much every day during the season if we have a monitor that can go out there. And our seasons are from about mid-March to mid-May in the springtime. And then in the fall, we start about August 15th and go to the end of November this year. Because, and honestly, we went to just November 15th in previous years, and we discovered that belugas were still showing up in some of the rivers and some other locations even further into the month. So we haven't even quite finished our monitoring at this point. But
Is this their migration season then that you're monitoring, or?
No, so one of the things, so the belugas, let me kind of paint a picture that the Cook Inlet mostly freezes over in the wintertime. So the
Okay.
belugas in the winter gradually move south, and Mandy knows more about exactly where they go up farther up, but they gradually move south as things start to freeze over. They spend the majority of the winter time in the southern part of Cook Inlet, and they think more towards the middle of the inlet rather than along the shores. Belugas are very much a shore-based forager.
Okay.
Then in the spring, they come start moving back up as the ice begins to recede and as they can get farther up the river. So, for example, we'll see them sooner on the Kasilof or the Kenai rivers than they will farther up north. And I have to put my hands in. But then they'll move on to Turnagain Arm, and then in the springtime, early in the spring, and Mandy would know better, they all meet up on around Kinnick Arm, and they have their mating season. And then for the rest of the spring and the summer, they start moving all along the inlet, following basically the fish runs.
Okay.
So yeah, in the spring, hooligan runs start in April, and they go through April and May, maybe a little bit into June. In early June, you start getting some kings returning, and you might get an early red sockeye run. And then you get the big sockeye run in the summertime, particularly along the Kenai River. The belugas don't come in anymore to the Kenai River because there's so much human traffic in there, everybody fishing for sockeyes. And then in the fall, the silver runs come in, and the belugas are coming into the river chasing silvers. The EDNA project that I was talking about, one discovery they made was that belugas that are still coming into the river sometimes in November are actually, there's a small longfin smelt run that comes into the Kenai River in November, and that correlates to when the belugas are coming in at that time, when really there's no other fish.
Okay.
But yeah, so, and again, we're watching in places where we know they go, and that's accessible to shore-based monitors.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Teresa hit it really well. There is a kind of a, even though belugas don't migrate out of Cook Inlet, there is a seasonal movement pattern within Cook Inlet. And so there is a lot more known about belugas movement in the summer. And as Teresa indicated, we can see almost the entire population up in an area that we call the Susitna River Delta. And so that's in the north part of Cook Inlet, a little bit more on the west side. So we can't really drive there. But some of our partners conducting research by boat or aerial surveys have seen, almost about 300 whales in that area in the summertime. So it's an extraordinarily important foraging and likely mating and potentially calving ground as well. And so one of the questions that we thought the community scientists could help answer is what's going on in the spring and the fall. We have a pretty good solid grasp on summer. And so, potentially all the whales could be in this upper Cook Inlet region in the summer. But as Teresa said, as the ice comes in, we know less about their movements, and other seasons. But they do disperse a little more. They're not found in like a group of 300. They're these small little groups that are moving around. Teresa, what's the most you guys have counted in the Kenai River at one, like in a single kind of thing?
Maybe 40, maybe
yeah.
40.
Which is a really big group still.
That's a really big group for our river.
Yeah, oftentimes it's 2 or 3 whales that will be seen. So that was like a monumental sighting to learn that potentially a group of 40 belugas are going up the Kenai River, which we wouldn't have known but for this AKBMP monitoring effort. So it's really valuable information. And the information that they're garnering can help go back to those management agencies when they're making permitting decisions of, oh, look, if we just postpone this by 2 weeks, the belugas will be gone and it'll be easier to, or if we start 2 weeks earlier, and I'm just kind of making up some scenarios.
Right.
But it is providing that information of like, yes, belugas are in this area. They are an endangered species. We do have an obligation to make sure that whatever we're doing is not jeopardizing their continued existence.
Right. Yes, so it's what a wonderful program this is, because it is, like you said, it's providing so much information and insight into what their life is like, and how you can support their like their continued survival of what they need, where they're going, all these interactions with humans and how that's affecting them. It's all groundwork for a potential for more protection for them when you have all this research
Yes.
at your disposal to give to these to the government, to whoever these decision makers. When you're monitoring them, are you looking for certain behaviors that you're looking out for? Are there odd behaviors that you're noticing about them?
So let me kind of paint a picture, maybe just for the Kenai River, for example. We have, and a lot of people don't know this, but we have a tidal influence on the Kenai River that goes up 11 miles.
Mm,
We have tidal swings in all of Cook Inlet that are like 30 feet. You might have, if you have a -5 low tide, you might have a 25-foot high tide.
wow.
So imagine that you're a beluga whale in Cook Inlet. The whole inlet has this kind of push. You're hungry, you're energy efficient, you're moving with the tide, right?
Right.
When the belugas come in, they are coming in to look for a couple of things. They're foragers, they're also benthic. So when there aren't regular big fish runs in, they might be looking for anything in all this silt. Mandy was telling me you can't see anything in the Kenai River. It's all glacier fed. It's
Yeah,
very,
so
very
it's all
silty.
silty.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they are looking for what is being pushed into the river by the tide.
Mm,
And they are then going farther upriver and looking for what's coming down. Trout,
okay.
Dolly Varden, smolt, fry, anything that's also coming downriver could be a source of food for them. So they want to, every day that they can, if there's not a lot of fish coming in the river, they tend to go farther to see what's coming downriver if there's better sources of food. So you have this big tide swing. They tend to come in right as the tide turns from low to moving towards high. So the low tide hits, we go into what they call slack tide. If there's a big fish run, hooligan or salmon, they're usually waiting just outside the mouth, and they're also waiting for the tide to push them in. So the come in, usually during slack tide, and then they literally turn around and face the mouth of the river so that when the fish get pushed in, they're just right there. The seals are doing the same thing. The eagles, the seagulls, everybody that's waiting for fish is kind of doing the same thing. And
Brilliant.
then when this big run comes at them, once it gets past them, then they're just fishing and fishing. And then they make these big circles where they come around and face the mouth again, come around and face the mouth again, come around and face the mouth again. The fish run gets past them, and now they're chasing them up the river. So when we're out there monitoring, we're looking for when they come in. Honestly, if they don't come in during that slack tide, it tells us something. It tells
Hmm.
us that they know there's no fish out there. Or if there's a later fish run coming in, the fish don't always sit there right exactly before low tide. The fish are being pushed all up along the whole coast by our great tides. It gives us some concept of what's going on with the fish run. In other words, watch what the belugas do and when they choose to come into the river and set up for the fish runs. Or as they come in, we watch their behaviors. If they don't even turn around when they come in to face the incoming tide and they head straight up the river, that tells us something too. That tells us they're either chasing a run that got past them that came in earlier, or it tells us that they're going to go farther up the river because they're going to be looking for what's coming downriver more than what's coming upriver. In the springtime, before the hooligan get there, they are almost always going pretty far upriver because they're trying to get to the ice usually hasn't melted when they first start coming in all the way upriver. So they're usually going right to the edge of the ice, and as far as they can get under the ice. depending on, if you're a mom with a baby, you're not going very far under the ice when the tide is pushing you under, right? If
Right.
you can imagine that. Um, and when they turn around from that position headed upriver, now they have to fight the tide coming to get back out if they go too far. So we're watching their behavior all the time because it's indicative of what they're hunting for. But we also watch their behavior in terms of human interaction, because in the spring and in the fall, when they come in, they're intermixed with boats all the time. There's hunters out there. It's a big bird hunting area on the Kenai River, off on the sides. There's an airport right there at the mouth. So we're watching their behavior in terms of human interaction a lot, and in terms of how they're reacting to different things that they come across. Are the boats getting too close to them? It's not unusual for us to see that people are getting too close to the beluga pods that are coming in, because mostly we have a bird's eye view. We're standing up on a bluff. We're looking down on the river. We can often see the belugas when people don't even know that they're there. We watch when the military jets go over. That we talk a lot about noise.
Yes.
Noise, anything that's making a lot of noise, and we're marking that on our forms. And then we're marking whether or not the belugas are reacting to it. Shots fired in the hunting zone, shots fired on the river.
Yeah.
And what they're doing. Are they diving? Are they turning around? Are they, in some cases, they're fleeing the river, if something is happening. But we also watch their behavior when they come in to see how pods react to each other. It's very interesting. Mandy talked a little bit about the pods and how they break up. You might have a nursery pod, which is mostly moms and aunties, and then the calves of the year and a little bit older calves. And then you might have another big pod come in, and it's very interesting to watch how those two interact. The group coming into the river pod is already there, will actually honk, and you can hear it up on the bluff, will honk to let other beluga groups know that they're coming in.
Wow.
We have seen one of those mom and baby pods at one time turn around and almost kind of try and run off the other pod, because they're like, nope, my river, my river today. We're not interested in a younger male group or something that's coming in. We try to assess their behavior a little bit, because it also tells us what they're going to do and how that ties in to everything that we do. Is we spend a lot of time talking to people down at the docks, to people in the communities, about when and how the belugas use the Kenai River for that public awareness, is particularly boaters. And that's one of our, it's not part of the actual monitoring function, but through AWA and through the text alert system, which we'll talk about a little bit. But we try to keep people informed of exactly when the belugas are in the river, so that people can come out and see them, but so that boats navigating on the river know that they're there. So anybody working in or around the river. I just had a case that the other day where I went down, and I was down there talking to a different boater when the fire department came down getting ready to launch and rescue operation, which is very important. You don't want to interrupt that, right?
Right.
I happen to know a very small pod of belugas getting ready to pass the boat ramps. And I went and talked to their captain, and I said, can you wait for a second and let that pod go by? Because they have a very small calf, and we know that they're there. So that kind of thing. So we watch the belugas' behavior. Sometimes we also watch how they're coming in, because it gives us a sense of how they're feeling about the river at any given time. And Mandy knows, sometimes they come bounding in and they're halfway out of the water, and you get that really nice view of the dorsal fin. Sometimes they come in what we call stealth mode. They're barely surfacing. They're a little worried about coming into the river today, because you don't know what happened in all those hours that there wasn't a monitor out there.
Right.
but they're very concerned about coming into the rivers for some reason that day. So you start paying more attention just to try and figure out what's going on in the river that has them so worried. There's orcas out in the inlet. Sometimes they're coming in just to escape um, predators out in the
Right.
inlet that they have to worry about. So, kind of hard to figure out what's going on. It's not always the humans.
This the monitoring program is so essential and necessary and paramount and integral for their continued survival. I mean, you just gave us so much information of what you're looking for, what you're monitoring. You're like doing a public service announcement in a way where you're asking the captain of this boat, like, can you just wait a minute? Just let them pass. You're just raising awareness of that they need to get through and they have just this very small area to get through. I mean, it's this program is amazing.
Yes, yes, it is. Yes,
Do
it's a
you, sorry, go ahead.
no, you.
I was going to ask you, are there other groups that you work with?
Yeah, we work with the one group that we recently worked with was the Boy Scouts. There was a young man who wanted to do an Eagle Scout project, and he actually contacted Alaska Wildlife Alliance and said, "What could we do?"
Oh,
And
wow.
and Mandy, I think, is who spoke with them and said, "Hey, we're worried about Cook Inlet belugas in the Kenai area, and they happen to be going to come up to the Kenai area."
Mhm.
Anyway, they designed uh, signs signs to go into the area around the city docks on the Kenai River and then along the beach in that same area. And what it was warning boaters and beachgoers that belugas were in the water during certain times of the day, gave a lot of good information about that. And then they came up with a slogan. It's very cute. Stay, uh, oh gosh, I wrote it down wrong. Stay clear, belugas live here. Um, and we worked with the city of
Fantastic.
yeah, we worked with the city of Kenai, and they allowed us to post one of the signs right on the piling on the boat ramp so
Oh,
that boaters
wow.
can't miss it as they walk down, and then one off to the side, and again two at the beach. And then, most importantly, they published our text alert number. Alaska Wildlife Alliance does a text alert every time belugas come into the river every day, just to say that they're in the river and give some basic information about where they are. And they posted our text alert number on the sign and asked boaters, please sign up for it so that boaters also know exactly where the belugas are at any given time.
Oh,
And
that's fantastic.
I just want to provide a point of clarity um, that we are not encouraging through this text alert system that people actually go out and on their boats and crowd the belugas.
No. Oh, so
What we're encouraging is people to come to the shore-based viewing stations so they can see belugas that way. But then it's for boaters to know where to avoid belugas. So we're not promoting, any additional harassment on these whales, but rather trying to avoid it while still engaging community members to get the rare opportunity to see belugas from a safe, to the belugas and humans, location. And then just one other little thing I wanted to point out. Teresa accidentally said dorsal fin. She meant dorsal ridge.
yes.
Belugas don't have that big distinct fin on their back, but they do have this like little lump area that we call the dorsal ridge. So
And that's where you can determine by their scar marks which whale it is,
so that's kind of
right?
that's one of the areas. But the
Okay.
photo ID group, they actually have kind of broken up the body of a beluga visually into, I think, 5 different regions. And
Okay.
so as the whale, and I'll try to use the bottom of my screen. So as the whale comes up and it just kind of like surfaces and goes down, you kind of see the head a little first, and then kind of that dorsal ridge area. It's like just a little bit of a raised lump. And then sometimes you can see the side of the body, and then maybe if they're lucky, a little bit of the tail. So they look for different scar patterns on different parts of the body on the left side and the right side. So in species that have a very prominent dorsal fin, like a bottlenose dolphin, a lot of times they're only looking at the fin and looking at scar patterns. But with us, because we're looking for white scars on white whales without that dorsal fin, we're looking for kind of scarring pattern kind of throughout the visible part of the body. And it varies depending on, as Teresa said, sometimes they come in and they're just barely getting their blowhole out of the water. You're not going to get much then.
Right.
But other times they're really like relaxed and they're coming up and you can see, a large part of the body. Those are the golden moments to get those photographs.
Right. So because they don't have that dorsal fin, you need to have other body parts to be able to identify.
Yeah, try to see more of the flank and also the back of the body for those scars, because those scars are all over their bodies.
Oh, okay.
But it's the upside is they do persist, year to year. And so, even if a particular individual hasn't been seen for a year, it may pop up in a photograph 2 years later, which is exciting because we're like, oh, good, still
Right.
alive.
Right. Relief.
Yes.
Relief. They're still here. They're still here.
Yep.
Are there other methods to monitoring the whales besides just you know, by those stations that you've mentioned? Or do you use drones, or I know that makes noise, but are there other ways that you monitor them?
Mostly for us, it's all shore-based. They do,
Okay.
NOAA does counts by plane, and there are a couple of different research projects that are trying to figure out how best to use drones if they can do it right. They are very careful with the Cook Inlet belugas for that type of research, so I'm not quite sure how close everybody is to being able to use drones for belugas, but we our monitoring station, somebody has to be there during the monitoring session, but we have people that because we know the belugas far up the river. So belugas on the Kenai, for example, um, go up to 10 miles up the river. And
Wow.
again, I said the tidal influence on that river is about 11 miles on a really high tide. And they're following that tide up and then they're following it back down again as it goes back out. We have several other locations. We have a bridge at 5 miles up, and then we have a Cunningham Park location that we can go watch them as they go by from about 6.5 miles up. And then there's a Beaver Creek at 8 miles. And that's during our monitoring programs at the Beaver Creek area is as high as we've actually seen them while we were monitoring. But we have a lot of oral histories that say that they've gone much further up the river. We see seals really far up the river.
Wow. That's so
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. But yeah, so it's less that there's times when you could be driving over the Warren Ames Bridge and traffic is half stopped because the belugas are passing under the bridge.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And
And
some of
it's
those look, oh, go ahead.
no,
Oh,
I
I would
was
say
I was
similarly along the Turnagain arm, going down Seward Highway, if you see a bunch of cars on the side of the road, it's a good chance there's some belugas out there.
Yeah.
oh, that's really sweet. That's really sweet. And it just shows, like you mentioned, Teresa, about the oral history, how important it is to have um, that it's a community science-based approach to identifying them and speaking to the people that have lived there that understand their patterning of the whales. It's just so beneficial for your continued research for them, which is great.
Yeah, and on the, even on the issue of boat strikes, longtime commercial fishermen, if you watch them on the river in Kenai, go out very slowly. They're always watching for the belugas. They know when they come and go. And they're going out sort of no wake, like you would expect.
Okay,
There's no
yeah.
rules for no wake. So longtime locals know and are very aware of the belugas and try to watch for them and are really very receptive of our information and sharing information. The dock workers on the city piers know when the belugas come and go all the time as well. And then some of the guides and so, again, it goes usually to how long somebody's been there. The people that we're trying to get to are the people that don't launch there very often, and who sort
Okay.
of routinely go out there and, geez, I think I'm going to launch at the city docks and come out behind the belugas, or they, sometimes they see them there and they launch in particular. That, as Mandy said, that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to get them not
Exactly.
that.
Right. Right.
but
Yeah. It
but
just
and see
takes a
the
little bit of awareness and by your
yeah,
part of sharing that information with them.
right. And the other boaters are going to listen to those long time commercial guys
Oh, for
faster
sure.
than they're going to listen to me wandering around the docks going, hey.
Right.
Although
Right.
I'm getting pretty well known down there now.
Oh, that's great. That means you're doing your job, Teresa.
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And I just wanted to circle back, Nicole, your question about drones. I do know that NOAA fisheries scientists have, in the past couple years, I don't know if they're still doing it, but they did come out and test out, trying to learn more about the Cook and the Belugas using drones.
Oh,
And
really?
in other areas where the water is clearer, they have been able to use drones, for instance, on killer whales. And they have been able to get aerial imagery and to be able to see, like, oh, this killer whale is this wide, and we can see that she's getting wider and wider, and then she got narrow and had a baby next to her. So they can see like her growth during pregnancy. Um, so they were hoping they could come up and take some width measurements, essentially, if you will, to try to do some health assessments. But I do believe the chocolate milk nature of the water
Right.
um, prevented that same type of assessment. So they were looking to see if they could find other ways to measure, to get some type of health index. And I think they were looking at the blowhole to the start of that dorsal ridge I mentioned, to see if that distance. The status of that work, I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
But our turbid waters up here again make research very difficult for things like that.
Oh, I can imagine the way you
And
explained it.
yeah, there's been one time that I'm aware of that um, drones were used when a coconut beluga was observed stranded when the tide went out. And so the mud flats were exposed, and
Oh,
someone driving
wow.
down the highway could see there was a beluga stuck out there. And this was in Turnagain Arm, where those extreme tides that Teresa was talking about, and they move so fast that sometimes the belugas don't get out in time. And it's pretty normal, unfortunately, for belugas to get high and dry for hours.
Oh,
Um, and so it was really far out, but it was right off the highway. So we were able to work with a permitted drone company, and they were able to fly out, and we were actually able to see it was a mom and a calf that were stuck out there. But what was really amazing is she had this perfect little circle, this little pool of water around her. And so we know she was able to like wiggle and kind of make this pool. So when the tide went out, she created this little swimming pool for her and her baby, um,
wow.
until the tide returned. And then we were able to look at the drone footage as well. When that tide comes back in, it is strong, it is fast. People die in it. I mean, it is significant. And we actually could see the baby got washed away. While mom was still, there wasn't enough water to refloat mom. That little calf got washed away. And it was just like, but I was able to keep watching long enough, and I could see this little baby coming back, and it made it back to mom. And we were able to watch mom and the baby calf swim away through this drone footage.
Oh, my
So
goodness.
it was this really fantastic feeling of like this drama and this whole story. And we were on high alert for days after that, just to make sure that no one saw um, a dead beluga
Oh,
afterward. And so it was great. It was this wonderful success story that we actually did get to watch out. So that was one really useful way of using the drone, because it is not safe for humans to go out on the mud flats in Turnagain Arm. Like I said,
so
people
it's
die
just
every year.
that's so sad though. If you
So
see them stranded, that
yes, it
you're
is. It
just
is very
hoping that
sad.
the tide gets them back out when it
Exactly, and
returns.
it is part of. Unfortunately, it is part of life in Cook Inlet for our belugas, and we do have mass stranding. Sometimes, 30, 40, 50, 70 belugas can get
Oh,
stuck at a time. But I think because it is part of their life and they go through this all the time. They've grown up with this. They seem to cope with it really well. And so I do think, if it was like a humpback whale that gets stuck, we all kind of know that is not going to turn out well. But we all have hope for our coconut belugas when they do live strand because the tide goes out. And unfortunately, just because of the human safety concern, especially in turning an arm, there's really not people going out and doing these big rescues. We just kind of have to watch and wait.
Okay.
So it was a really exciting little use of the drone. And again, I want to
Right.
qualify, they were permitted, they were authorized. This is not just someone with a personal drone. That's against the law. So
Right.
it was really exciting that it could give us that type of information, and we wouldn't have been able to see the baby because the angle that mom was to the highway where we were using binoculars and stuff. But it really gave us this great visual. And then we were able to capture those scar patterns on mom. And so we were able to identify mom, or the photo ID catalog folks were able to identify her. And then we're like, oh, she has a baby. They were able to add that to their records. And
Beautiful.
so, yeah, so it's really nice when all these different pieces come together and give us that information that we're lacking.
Right. Right. It takes a village.
Yes.
Certainly does. I wanted to ask how how can folks that live in the area help? What can they do? And what can folks do that live out of state, like myself, to help support their future existence?
Well, folks in the area, just stay aware of the belugas, most importantly, and help spread the word to other people about belugas. A lot of people bring visitors out if they're already aware of them, but I talk to people in Kenai all the time who had no idea. They've lived there for 10 years and they had no idea belugas came up the river.
Wow.
Yeah. um, so help spread the word. Also, if you live in the area, sign up for our text alert system so you know that they're there, especially if you're a boater and are going to go out during any of the seasons. So AWA's text alert system again, and I can give you the phone number. If you just type the word beluga or text the word beluga to this phone number, it's 1-833-541-0408. And it'll come back and tell you right away that you're signed up for the text alert system. You can stop it at any time. I should say that. But just to be aware of the belugas and that they're out there and sharing information. Also, if you do see any marine mammal stranded out there, report it. NOAA has a stranding hotline. I'll give you their phone number as well. It's 1-877-925-7773. So report any marine mammal that you think is in trouble. If it's a baby seal and it's alive, but it's been out there for a long time all by itself, that counts as somebody who needs to be reported. If it's a beluga, alive or dead, sea lions, sea otters, anything, just report them and we'll get somebody out there to take a look and see if they really are in trouble and then try and formulate a plan. Report strandings, report sightings. Cook Inlet Photo ID, and I don't have their phone number on hand, but just because we have monitors out there doesn't mean we don't want people who are seeing the whales running up along the shore. I mean, we're watching from inside the Kenai River and right at the mouth of the Kasilof River. So if you see them going up and down the shore in Cook Inlet, report that as well, just so that we get a better sense of where the belugas are. They don't necessarily come into the river every single day, and we won't necessarily know that they're out there. Also, if you're a boater, spread the word amongst boaters. Just, hey, watch out for the belugas. Watch out for marine life out there. It's not just belugas that get hit by boats.
Right.
Also, sort of stay on top of the issue. And there are public comment periods to almost everything, every piece of legislation or everything anybody's trying to do. And Mandy, you can probably refer to this a little bit better, but there are always public comment periods, and we could use all the support we can get for things we're trying to accomplish that will best help the belugas. Did I miss anything, Mandy?
Yeah, I would just add on the strandings. A lot of folks think that, oh, the animal's dead, it can wait. I don't have to try to report it right away. But the problem with that is that the longer it goes unreported, the less information we can learn from it. And so we need to know about, or the stranding program folks need to know as soon as possible when you see a dead beluga, because if they can get to it right away, that will give them more information about why the animal died, more information about the status of its health. Did it die because of a disease? And maybe they can get some information, take samples to learn about their contamination level. But the longer it sits there, and they rot pretty quickly, especially, we have a really hot summer day up here. For us, really hot. It's like 70.
70.
Yeah. But it can go pretty quickly. So it's very important. Don't think that because it's dead, we can't learn anything. But the longer it sits there without a response, the less we can learn. So it's very important to call and report it right away and try to get the location. And then the other thing that anyone can do, whether you're in the Kenai area or the Cook Inlet area or Alaska or stateside or even international, the federal government, anytime they authorize take of a beluga or anytime that they allow harassment to be authorized, they put out a public comment period and they ask for the public to weigh in on that. So anyone can respond to those notices. And so you just
How
have
do
to
we learn about
look for
those?
them. And I just spaced on the name of the site. They're in the Federal Register. And I think if you go to the Federal Register, you can sign up to be notified on certain keywords.
Oh,
and
okay.
so I think you could kind of ask to be notified for anything about Cook Inlet belugas or things like that. And I think you'll get an email.
Okay.
Um,
And if somebody that lives in the area, can they sign up to be part of the monitoring program?
Teresa.
Yes, absolutely. My gosh, thank you, Nicole, for thinking through. Yes, we're always looking. Actually, we're always looking for new volunteers for the AKBMP and for the Stranding Network to help with any of that stuff. But yes, if you could just go to www.akbmp.org or .org.
I think it's
Yeah, you can go out and it tells all about the program. It's fairly easy to get signed up. They have an annual training program that everybody's asked to go through. And then once you've gone through that training and give the main coordinator up in Anchorage all the information that they need, then you respond out during a monitoring session. You have to see belugas on the day that you're trained. And you go out with a lead observer who's going to train you exactly how to fill out the reports, all the different information that we're looking for as we're monitoring, and then the behaviors and just how to document all of that and then how to upload it into the system. But yes, we always need new monitors.
Okay. And that is www.akbmp.com.
.org.
.org. Okay. Thank you.
And the beauty of that is you don't need prior experience. You'll get trained, and there are sites, around from Anchorage down to Kenai Kasilof, so upper to mid Cook Inlet. And once you pass the training session, the monitoring shifts, Teresa, I think they're 2-hour shifts, so they're not an onerous time commitment. And the partnership allows all these different sites to be trained the same way using the same data sheets. So the data collected from different locations can be comparable and used in a meaningful manner. So it's really standardizing, all these different locations to collect the same type of data in the same manner. So it's actually usable.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Is there anything that you would like to add before we conclude our podcast today?
I feel like we said so much.
I know. I feel like there was a lot said today, but just in case I missed something.
There's a lot left to be learned about Cook Inlet belugas. The environment makes it so challenging. But it's very important work that's being done because, like I said, once these belugas are gone, they're gone forever, you
Right.
know, and so it's extremely valuable and personal for those of us who live in Cook Inlet. And I know I had mentioned that there hasn't been subsistence hunting since 2005, but they're historically a very culturally important species to the Alaska Native communities in Cook Inlet as well. And, you know, they're losing some culture the longer that these whales aren't doing well. You know, generations are coming in that have lost that knowledge of that cultural aspect of the program, of their lives. And it's also just, it's so amazing when you get to see them, when you get to hear them.
I can't
There's
imagine.
nothing like it. Yeah. And they're so special up here. And, you know, I think really underscores the passion that a lot of us have for really trying to save them. But by saving the belugas, I think really we're saving Cook Inlet as a whole. Like I said, it's not just the belugas that aren't doing great. It's the
Right.
whole ecosystem is undergoing change. And if we can save the top predator, the top species, then there is a trickle down effect because it relies on everything else being in balance. So,
Right.
you know, one thing we do try at AWA is to take an ecosystem approach to conserving wildlife for future generations to enjoy.
Yes, and I think, like you said, they're the top predator, and there's that cascade effect. If something is amiss for them and their survival, then it just keeps going down the chain. And that's what I love about AWA is that approach to ecosystem, taking it as a whole instead of its parts. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for both of you and AWA for putting your hearts out there and working so hard and tirelessly to support the continued survival of this endangered species that is explicitly just in the Cook Inlet, that has been there for so many years. Like you said, it has this history and cultural significance that we don't want to see lost. So thank you so much.
Well, Nicole, thank you so much for having us and sharing the message and the plight of the Cook and the Belugas. And hopefully others will feel empowered in some way to help out too.
Yes, thank you both.
Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, and especially for choosing this topic. Thank you for
Mhm.
choosing this topic and then reaching out to us. It is very personal for us. You know, there's 300 whales, and in my case, I know the ones that come into the Kenai for sure.
Right,
Mhm.
right. And it's so personal for you. You have a very close relationship with them, so to speak, because you're so in it and watching them and just rooting for their survival.
Yes, yes,
Yep.
and the group of volunteers. I mean,
Right,
it's personal for everybody, but they're all a big family as well because
right.
they're all doing the same thing and focusing on the same issues.
Yeah, I can imagine. So thank you for all of your work.